when we gathered here for my mother's funeral. This history of Dad's life was compiled by the various conversations he had with his 3 children over the years. It was read out to him 3 months ago, so he has heard it before you. Now he has gone ahead of us on the journey that each of us will one day make. Today is a reminder and also a preparation for our journey. We are in sacred time and space. Ernest Leonard Waring Hastings, universally known as Leonard or Len, was born in Poplar, London on 27th of April 1907 to John Edward Hastings and Susanna Matilda Hastings. At that time, the family home was in Crisp Street, Poplar, London. The choice of Dad's given names was in honour of the names of the 3 priests at St Albans Church, East Ham. It was to this church that Dad came regularly with his mother. He was the second youngest of 8 children. However, Dorothy was born 2 years later, died at age 16 months. At the time of Dad's birth, his father was 42 and his mother 39. His brothers and sisters were Leopold, 15, John Edward, 14, Mari, 11, George, 7, Daisy, 6, and Bernard, 3. His father, John Edward Hastings, born, we think, in 1865, was president of the local working man's club and was a popular and outward-going personality. He was known as Jack. Later, after a fall which caused serious injury to his head, Jack had to retire from work. His work had been that of a ship's smith at McWhirter Robinson, 56 East India Dock Road, Poplar. A ship's smith made repairs to internal fittings within ocean-going ships. The coming and going of these ships would have been a big part of Len's childhood. Also, the start of his love affair with ships and the sea. The First World War broke out when Len was 7 years old. By this time, the family home was at 345 Central Park Road, East Ham. Dad can remember gun carriages and training in the nearby park, and at the time it seemed very exciting. However, the war was to be a tragedy for the family. John was the first to die. He was killed at Gallipoli in 1916, aged 23. On one occasion, when George was home on leave, he called Len to the window to see a Zeppelin. They could see it caught in searchlights and it was hit by gunfire. They watched it burst into flames and crash. Curiously, it landed in Potter's Bar, where Dad was to live as an adult. George was in the Rifle Brigade and was killed in 1918 at Arras, 1 month before the war was to end, aged 18. Leopold was a ship's cook on the SS Carpentaria, a troop ship kept returning from Australia. He caught malaria and died in 1917, aged 25. This death was particularly sad as Len's father was assigned to do work on that ship. He was told there was a deceased body on board, but he didn't know at first that it was his son. The war ended in 1918 when Len was 11 years old. He had lost 3 of his oldest brothers. Dad remembers the man lighting the gas street lamps. Children would come out at night and play around the street light. Presumably the man came back later or in the morning to put them out. Dad played soccer in the street, 2 groups kicking to each other. On one occasion, a policeman on foot caught them. Nothing was said, and everyone ran away except Dad. He owned the ball. There was also cricket. A tree with a protective wooden ring around it was the wicket. If the batsman got to 100, he got another innings. When he was 13, Dad tried to work where his father had worked, but an error in the paperwork revealed he was too young. So instead he worked for Joseph Joe Pelledri at his fish and chip shop in Kingston. Joe had married Dad's older sister Mari. Dad helped with the buying of the fish and potatoes from the market. A ton of potatoes could be ordered. Joe's 1904 Mercedes car was used to collect supplies. Dad was paid 10 shillings a week and with accommodation. At 14, he was able to work at McWhirter Robinson. Dad's duties were to shop for requisitions. He was given a sack to carry items in. As he visited the various suppliers, he found his father was well known in many places. His wages were 15 shillings a week, but out of this he had to pay the bus fares necessary to get supplies. Particularly long items needed to be stowed in a space near the driver. Dad became a lifelong fan of West Ham Football Club. Dad loved to go bicycle riding. A favourite trip was to Purfleet to bring back bluebells for his mother. At 15, he spent a short time in service to a family in Wimbledon. He served meals prepared by the cook. On one occasion, he had a bleeding nose and a drop of blood landed on the table during serving. It was at the place of the daughter of the house, and she discreetly covered the drop with her plate. It was after this that Dad returned to working for Joe in his fish and chip shop in Kingston. Later, when offered work inside the kitchen, Dad asked for £3 a week and was given it. Dad learned how to prepare fish and to cook it. Cooking was in lard, not oil. The shop was very busy at times. This experience was to encourage Len to set up his own shop, but this business was not a success. Dad was much more successful when he joined Blundell's, a company that sold household goods. Of the many hopefuls that applied, Dad was among the 12 or so taken on. Customers would order items from a catalogue and pay by weekly instalments. Dad's duties were both obtaining orders and collecting payments. This involved travelling between towns by bicycle. He was good at this work, and unlike many who didn't continue, Dad did this for 5 years. Dad was promoted to supervisor and then area manager based at Walthamstow. He started at £3 a week plus commission and progressed to £10 a week. He could afford to order a tailor-made suit. Plucking up courage, he entered a tailor near the local railway station. He was overwhelmed with the choice of materials. Soon he had 6 suits. Thus began my father's sartorial splendour. One time, Dad won a hamper for returning the best sales performance. Apparently it was a magnificent hamper with port, cigars, cigarettes and so on. On the way home with this, he ordered a living room suite of furniture for his mother. He was on top of the world. In 1931, at the age of 24, Len was invited to meet the sister of Maggie, wife of Arthur Miles, a work colleague. This was Grace Robinson, who was described as being just like the girl in a current shampoo advertisement. Len was not disappointed, and they fell in love. In those days, before telephones were widespread, a fellow asked a girl out by post. This was fairly reliable because there were 2 deliveries a day, even on Saturday. Leonard invited Grace out for the following Sunday after being introduced. Grace played hard to catch by letting her acceptance arrive by the second post, 9 p.m. on Saturday. There were many happy outings during this time, often starting with a meeting at the Lions Corner House Cafe on the Strand. Lions Corner House waitresses were called nippies for their quick service. Wikipedia describes the Lions Corner Houses as the corner house, which first appeared in 1909 and remained until 1977, were noted for their Art Deco style. Situated on or near the corners of Coventry Street, the Strand, and Tottenham Court Road, they and Maison Lison at Marble Arch and in Shaftesbury Avenue were large buildings on 4 or 5 floors. the ground floor of which was a food hall with counters for delicatessen sweets and chocolates, cakes, fruits, flowers and more. As well as this, they had hairdressing salons, telephone booths, theatre booking agencies, and at one period, a twice-a-day food delivery service. On the other floors were several restaurants, each with different themes, and all with their own musicians. For a time, the corner houses were open 24 hours a day, and in their heyday, each one employed the region of 400 staff. They were colourful and bustling, with bright lights and ingenious window displays. On the 26th of September 1937, Len, aged 30, married Grace at Eltham Parish Church. By this time, Len was living at 56 Prince John Road, a temporary address, in order to qualify for marriage at that church. In August 1939, at age 32, the Second World War broke out. Len entered the military police and the RAF in the following year. He was given a pistol and dog to assist in border patrol at various airfields. He attained the rank of Corporal 1612674 RAF. When his mother saw Len in uniform, she said, "Oh no, not you too." It was a bitterly sad moment. Len's father died in 1941, aged 76, and a year later, his mother died. At the time, Dad and Grace were living at 8 The Walk, Potters Bar. He was aged 34. This was the last address they were to have in England. When Dad was 36, Stephen Andrew, myself, his first son, was born on the 29th of July 1943, and on August the 26th, 1946, Mark Waring was born. It was after this time that Len and Grace began to think about emigrating, as they thought this would give them and their 2 sons a better future. Grace had a distant relative in Perth, Western Australia, and this contact was used in the application papers. They then had forgotten about the application when in November 1949 they were offered free passage to Fremantle. They had just a few weeks to finalise their affairs. At the time, Len had set up his own business with another man selling teapots, crockery and so on. However, in the post-war years, it was hard to obtain goods to sell. Len sold his half share of the business to his partner. They arrived in Fremantle on January the 1st, 1950, aboard the SS Ranchi. He loved that trip out. Len was 42, Grace 38, I was 6 and Mark was 3. It must have seemed a most appropriate date for a new start in a new country. Soon Len had work at Sandover's, a department store in Hay Street, doing both retail and wholesale. He started in crockery, which he knew from his time at Blundell's in England. A perk of the job was to bring home much reduced, slightly damaged crockery. Later he was to manage the hardware department and then the toy department. The toy department was a big money earner for Sandover's. On May 13th, 1952, Leslie Ann Hastings, a daughter, was born. Then followed many family outings as the Hastings family explored Perth and surroundings, went to school and grew up. Eventually, as the times changed, Sandover's moved to Belmont and dealt only in wholesale. Len finished his time at Sandover's as manager of the purchasing department. Len retired in 1972. In a character reference dated April 6, 1988, Harry Cosgrove, one of the directors at Sandover's, wrote, "Len was employed by the firm of Sandover's Limited for approximately 20 years in various managerial positions and was an extremely competent operator in all spheres. He had the wonderful ability to extract enthusiasm and willingness from all staff. I can vouch on all staff under his management by personal example. I can vouch for his honesty and integrity in all respects. Now Len and Grace were eligible for the pension. Thus began Len's fruitful association with Centrelink, which has amounted to 44 years. The combined pension, supplemented with part-time work, meant that Mum and Dad's income was not significantly reduced from when Len was working full-time. On May 26, 1982, Renee Hastings, Dad's first grandchild, was born. Mum and Dad spent many happy hours looking after Renee as she grew up. Ben and Sam joined the list of grandchildren in 1988 and 1990. Len had 3 part-time jobs after retiring from Sandovers. After a short time doing cleaning duties at a printer's, he helped rear small chicks. There were 2 large sheds. The chicks were sold when they were 3 months old. On one occasion, the owner was away and Dad was left in charge. Dad was skilled with chickens. When I was a child, we had several in a chicken run built by Dad. Len was able to slaughter and prepare the chicken for cooking. His main part-time post-retirement job was at Waldex. He answered an ad wanting a handyman. Mother said at the time, "You're no handyman." Dad went on to work there for 5 years, 3 days a week from 8 a.m. to 12 noon. He made the morning tea and worked in the gardens. If he worked extra hours, he took payment in garden goods, as cash would affect his pension. As a consequence, our family garden flourished. On the subject of being a handyman, he did do some serious projects around the family house. As a child, I remember the cementing of the floor of the garage and attaching asbestos sheeting walls, which is not recommended nowadays. A tricky job was installing louvers in the sleep-out. I helped him with this, holding things in place. He also cemented the back garden path, giving it a slight slant to allow rain to run off. There was also repairing storm damage to the picket fence. With the picket fence, you get to see and talk to your neighbours. In 1973, aged 66, Len and Grace made a 3-month trip to England and caught up with their son, myself, who was living there at the time. In 1980, aged 73, Len and Grace made their second trip to England, since Len had retired. They were away for 11 months. They were able to live at Grace's sister Maggie's house in Letchworth. From there they made a number of excursions, including the Isle of Wight and Europe. On the 27th of July 1988, Len, at the age of 81, and Grace became Australian citizens. Earlier that year, Len's eldest sister, Mari, died. On the 8th of November 2003, Len's beloved Grace, wife for 66 years, died. Len was 96 and was still living in the same house we moved into 53 years ago. A few days after this, Dad came to live with Susan and myself in our house. The time had come to sell the Cannington family home. In August 2004, Len became a great-grandfather with the birth of Shane to Renee and Scott. Alyssa Lee followed in 2006. You can see them on the cover of your order of service. Dad lived with Susan and I for 18 months, and this proved to be a happy time. I was able to get to know him on a deeper level. One ritual we had was for me to visit his room to say goodnight to him once he was in bed. This was a very tender and loving moment for me. I would like to acknowledge the help that Silver Chain and Meals on Wheels provided at this time. In August 2005, Len moved to Trinity Lodge, Rowthorpe, Bentley, where he resided until his death. It was here that he celebrated his 99th, 100th, 101st and 102nd birthdays. On the occasion of the 100th, he had congratulatory letters from the Queen, Governor-General, Prime Minister, Leader of the Federal Opposition, Federal Member for Fremantle, the Premier, the State Governor, Leader of the State Opposition, and Federal Member for Swan. Remember, it was an election year. He was also made a fuss of at his hostel, where he was much loved and respected. And I would like to pay a tribute to the staff at Trinity, the Rowthorpe, for all the care they gave my father. Dad, I thank you for the life you gave me. I thank you for showing me a way through this aging process of life. And I thank you for showing me a good death. I remember you with deep affection and love.